How's it going, everybody? Ryan Gass here, Practical Training Professionals, and we're here today to do your basic pistol portion of your training. So for the duration of this course, if you have your own firearm at home that you're going to be working with, you want to make sure that first that it's unloaded and clear. All right, so what we want to do is we're going to take our firearm. Today I'm going to be using my Glock 17. We're going to make sure that both the chamber and the magazine is clear, and we're going to take out any loaded magazines and put them to the side. So we're going to double check. Our magazine right here it is empty, and then if you look here, the chamber is clear. All right, and also I have 2 extra magazines with me, so I'm going to check those as well. All right, empty as well. Empty as well. All right, go ahead and put those away. All right, and again, if you have any loaded magazines in your work area, go ahead and take those out and put them to the side now. Also, you can take a break at any point in time, pause the video, use the bathroom, get a little snack, whatever you need to do at any point in time during this video, and come back to it. Also, there will be a test at the end of this portion of the course, so you want to make sure you're paying attention, and if needed, take notes. The goal of this course is going to be for you to gain the basic knowledge, skills, and attitude necessary for owning and using a pistol safely, whether it's a firearm that you already own or you're looking to buy one in the future. This will better prepare you so you can safely do that. Next, we're going to go over the rules for safe gun handling. The first rule being, treat every firearm as if it were loaded. As we just demonstrated, this firearm is clear, and I'm just going to go ahead and double check. Magazine's empty, the chamber's empty. I always want to treat every firearm as if it were loaded. Even if I just double check to make sure it's unloaded, I still want to treat it as if it were loaded, because mistakes do happen, they have happened, with people assuming or believing or knowing even that the gun is unloaded. Right? Treat every firearm as if it were loaded regardless of what you think you know. Also, never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Notice how the rule is not, and I did not say never point another firearm at another human being. The rule is never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Because the unfortunate truth of the matter is that we may unfortunately have to point a firearm at another human being and discharge that firearm in the line of self-defense or defense of others. So never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Person, place, or thing. All right? Regardless, again, of whether you think it's unloaded or otherwise, treat it the same way every single time. Also, if your firearm has a safety, this one does not. But if your firearm does have a mechanical safety, a lever or a button that allows you to engage or disengage the firearm so that it can fire, you want to make sure that you always use that safety. Right? If you don't have a safety, hey, ignore that rule. But if you have a safety, use it. Do not rely on it. Think of a safety as your seatbelt. Just because you have your safety on doesn't mean you get to mishandle the firearm or treat it any differently than you would have before. Much like the seatbelt, you don't put your seatbelt on and all of a sudden you get to drive 40 miles an hour over the speed limit down some country back roads and expect to remain safe. Right? Same thing. Use it, but do not rely on it. And if you don't have a safety, ignore that rule. Next, you want to keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you are ready to fire. What does that mean and how do I teach that? You want to have your finger up on that frame, your trigger finger up on that frame until you're ready. Notice when I get a high firm grip, that comes more naturally. If I don't get a good high firm grip, which we'll go over more later, my finger tends to want to fall more over that trigger guard. Right? Why do I not want my finger covering that trigger guard? It's because you're more likely. Can it happen still when you have it on the frame? Yes, but you are more likely for your finger to slip and fall into that trigger, whether if somebody were to scare you, you trip, you fall, you sneeze, whatever. People tend to tense up, and you don't want to end up tensing up onto that trigger. All right? So you want to have your finger straight on the trigger on that frame until you're ready to fire. Next, and this is going to be very important when you're talking about home defense or concealed carry. All right? It's going to be a 3-part rule kind of. You want to, 1, know your target, and you also want to know what lies between you and that target and what is beyond that target. Let's break that down. Why do we want to know what our target is? All right? Why should you know what you are discharging a firearm at, whether it be a person or an animal? Right? Let's just talk about it from the hunting aspect, even though that's not so much big here, but some people can actually relate to the hunting aspect where Why should you know what you're starting a firearm at? One, for basic ethics, and two, for keeping with game laws. You want to make sure that what you're shooting at, you actually have the proper tags for. And in the self-defense aspect, you wouldn't want to just shoot at some dark human form walking through your house in the middle of the night, because that's how you might inappropriately and not necessarily shoot a family member that's entering the home that you weren't expecting, whether it be a spouse coming home early from work, a inebriated child returning from a house party that you didn't even know the child had left. You want to make sure that you don't just discharge your firearm at everything that moves. All right. Next, know what lies beyond your target and also between you and your target. All right, especially when you're talking about home defense and concealed carry, because you're responsible for every single round that leaves your gun. If in the course you defend yourself or others, you mistakenly injure or kill a person that was between you and that threat, or that was beyond that threat, you're still responsible for that. All right, whether legally, ethically, civilly, you are still responsible for that. So you want to make sure that you're aware of your surroundings at all points in time. Many of y'all will recall the church shooting at the West Freeway Church of Christ, December 29th of 2019. The gentleman had been in the church, had stepped out of his pew, walked to the rear of the church, and ended up discharging his firearm, killing two innocent individuals in the back of the church. Went to turn his gun and to continue shooting again throughout the church. And the hero, Jack Wilson, he shot that individual in self-defense as well as defense of others in the church, and he shot him in the face. If you recall, Mr. Jack Wilson stated that he shot him in the face even in conflict of his training. He was actually a firearm instructor himself, because if he had aimed lower for a larger target rather than the face, he would have possibly hit an innocent bystander that was between him and that person. He aimed above that innocent bystander, taking the only safe shot available at that face. Right? So that's an example of where the person was conscious of not only what was beyond their target, what was between it too. You're responsible for every single round that leaves your gun. Americans enjoy a right that many citizens of other countries do not: the right to keep and bear arms. That right is protected by the Second Amendment of the Constitution. It protects your rights from the government. But with that right does come responsibilities. It is the gunner's responsibility to store, operate, and maintain his or her firearms safely, to ensure that unauthorized or untrained individuals cannot gain access to your firearms. Who might that be? It might be your kids in your life. Maybe you have young kids like I do. I have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old daughters. They are not to the point yet where obviously I would trust them to handle their firearms without me there. I'm training them slowly but surely, and that'll come with time. But they would be someone that is not properly trained or authorized at this time. Could be maybe you have kids that are a little bit older, and maybe they are properly trained and they are authorized, but they have friends that come over to the house and they are not properly trained or authorized. Could be a family member or a friend that visits the house that they are not trained or authorized. It could even be a spouse. So you want to make sure that they don't have access to those firearms and have an accident possibly happen. You also need to learn and obey all applicable laws that pertain to the purchase and use of a firearm in your locality, where you live at, whether it's your city, state, the federal regulations. While I obviously do not, I'm not fond of any gun laws. They're all infringements of our Second Amendment rights. I'm still, held to those standards. I still have to be held accountable when I'm found to be in violation of those. So, one, conduct yourself smartly. Two, know what the laws are, where you're at. So there are many reasons why people like to own firearms or wanting to own firearms, including protection of their self or their family, whether in the home or outside the home when they're carrying on their person concealed or even open. Also, recreational shooting, just going out and having fun, plinking with the friends, and just sighting your guns. Also, we have competitive shooters, people that shoot whether as a hobby competitively or even those that shoot professionally and are sponsored by manufacturers and ammunition dealers. Also, hunting. Hunting is an aspect of firearms. For some people, they think it's the only aspect of firearms, but hunting has been, a big part of the area that I grew up in Southern Maryland. I didn't grow up in hunting. I am in hunting now, but it's just one aspect of the many reasons why I own firearms. Also, collecting. People just like to collect guns. Some people collect guns, some people collect stamps, some people collect coins. Jay Leno collects cars. So that's just another aspect that people like to partake in when it comes to firearms. There's professional reasons why someone might own or be using a firearm. I obviously use firearms professionally for my business, doing firearms training. Someone that maybe is in private detective work, they do security, maybe they're law enforcement or they're military and they're issued a firearm, they might use a firearm and have a firearm whether issued to them or otherwise because of the work that they do as a professional. And then, just because you can. The Second Amendment allows you the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't matter what your reason is. Some people just do things just because they can, and that's perfectly fine. I'm all about supporting your Second Amendment rights, regardless of your reason. As long as you're doing it ethically, I don't mind what your reason is, right? Even if it's, open carrying of a long gun, down the road and stuff. It's not particularly my thing. I don't do it. But hey, if you want to exercise your right in that manner and you're not putting anyone in harm's way, hey, more power to you. So when you're looking at firearms, there's going to be two main types of cartridges. Your guns are going to generally fire one or the other. Now, we have rimfire or we have centerfire. Right? Rimfires tend to be your smaller calibers, like your 22s, your 17 HMRs. Your centerfire tend to be the relatively small to the extremely large calibers, from your 25 auto, your 380s, your 9s, your 45s, your 40s, all the way up to, and this is not so much for handguns, but all the way up to 50 BMG. All right, they're going to be very similar overall. They both have projectiles or bullets. That is the actual part of the overall cartridge. The overall assembly is referred to as a cartridge or round. The bullets, sometimes they're referred to as bullets, but that's inaccurate. The bullet actually is specifically the projectile. That when you fire that gun, that bullet, that projectile travels down the barrel, exits the muzzle, and it travels downrange towards hopefully your intended target. That specifically is what referred to as the bullet or projectile. Those are acceptable interchangeable terms. Now, behind that, we have our powder. The powder is ignited by the primer. The primer sets off a small spark, ignites a large explosion, and that combustion is created, and that is what forces that projectile down the barrel towards your target. At times, if somebody or yourself is shooting in low light or no light conditions, you will see some of a muzzle flash. That is that combustion escaping from that barrel. Now, with the rimfire to centerfire, the chemical compound for the primer for the rimfire is found in the rim of the casing. When that is set off, that again creates that small spark, which ignites that powder and creates that combustion. Now, similarly, but a little bit different, the centerfire cartridge, you have a primer that's located in the center of the rear of that casing, and again, when that firing pin comes down and strikes that primer, that creates that small spark, in turn, that large explosion, combustion forces that projectile down that barrel. So you want to identify and make sure you shoot the right ammunition out of your gun. You may have bought a gun and for years you maybe didn't use it and you forgot what caliber it is. Or let's say you bought it and you didn't come with a user's manual or a box. Let's say you got a gun handed down to you by a family member that might have passed. You want to make sure that you don't just assume what the gun fires. You want to make sure you use the right ammunition from your gun. One, to make sure you don't damage the firearm, but ultimately two, and most importantly, is for your safety. So, example, this actually is a Glock 17, but much like it, I have a Glock 22. It was the first handgun I ever bought. A Glock 22 is a full-size handgun that shoots, it's a full-size Glock that shoots 40 Smith & Wesson. I bought that, I used it for several years, but then for whatever reason decided that I wanted to actually have the gun and I want to have it shoot 9mm. The neat thing with Glocks is you can actually just change the barrel out, and you can take that Glock 22 that shoots 40 and you can change out the 9mm barrel, and now it shoots 9mm. Now, with that gun on the outside, it still indicates and still says Glock 22 40, but if you look at the barrel, it is 9x19, 9mm. So you wouldn't want to mistakenly load that gun with 40, or vice versa. You wouldn't want to take a 9mm that you changed out the barrel to 40 and put 9 in it. Can you shoot 9mm? Will a 9mm load, chamber, and fire from a 40? Yes, you can. It is extremely, it can put your firearm's integrity at risk. It can damage your firearm. It can also possibly harm you. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to mix up ammunition. You want to make sure you shoot the right ammunition for your gun. And again, verify the caliber of your gun by checking the barrel. Another example, not related to handguns per se, but like AR-15s. On the receiver, it may say a certain caliber, it may say multi-cal. If the receiver says 223 and 5.56, you could have changed the upper receiver out to multiple different calibers. Calibers that you can't obviously shoot 223 or 5.56 out of. So you always want to make sure you check the barrel and nothing else about the gun, the frame, whatever, the slide. Check the barrel. So once you've determined the caliber of your firearm, you want to then make sure you have the proper ammunition. Now, how you can do that is on the back of civilian ammunition, it'll have stamped on the back what caliber it is. On the slide behind me, you'll be able to see that on the back of that casing, it says 38 Special. And that matches up with the barrel of that firearm, which also indicates 38 Special. So it is safe and proper to use that ammunition out of that gun. You don't want to mix up ammunition. Make sure you have the right ammunition for your gun. Otherwise, again, it can create a situation that can damage your gun and create an unsafe circumstance for you and those around you. So here you see a small snapshot of some of the popular calibers that are available out there. This is by no means all the calibers or even a lot of them. This is some of the popular ones that a lot of people know, have heard of, or can gravitate to. We have everything as small as 22 long rifle. You'll see a 9mm in there, as well as 40, 45, even the 38 Special in there. 9mm currently, it is one of the more popular semi-automatic calibers that a lot of people tend to gravitate to for home defense and concealed carry. I myself happen to also use 9mm. Not to say that it's the best one out there, or the worst one, but it's what works for me. And it's what found to be working for a lot of people. How that kind of comes to be a lot of times is whatever the FBI ends up doing or using, a lot of the local police departments start using. And because of that, a lot of people end up saying, hey, well, it's good enough for the local sheriff's office or police department, it's got to be good enough for me and what I'm doing. So that's how a lot of that tends to happen. For a while there, 40 Smith & Wesson was the go-to choice, and that's kind of died down in recent years. Now the more popular tends to be the 9mm. A lot of people, you can see 45 ACPs in there. 45 is a very popular caliber, used in a lot of 1911s, been around for many, many decades. Good round in general. Now, does ammunition expire? A lot of people say, yeah, it does. You know, it's got an expiration date. No. Ammunition does not expire. All right. Generally speaking, you want to store your ammunition in a cool, dry place. That'll ensure that your ammunition is proper and safe to use for years and decades even to come. Why do you want to not introduce moisture to your ammunition? Because of metallic surfaces, and it can corrode and make the ammunition unserviceable and even unsafe to shoot. So you want to make sure that you inspect your ammunition before you use it. So there's two main types of ammunition that people tend to be using for different reasons. Full metal jacket and hollow point. Now, full metal jacket is a relatively, compared to hollow points, tends to be a more affordable ammunition to buy, and it's more or less geared towards and used for on the range. Hollow points have sometimes gotten a negative connotation based on misinformation out there. What hollow points do and why people use them is because let's just start with the name. Hollow point, the nose of the ammunition is hollowed out. What does that do? What is that? Why do people gravitate towards that? It's because when the projectile hits and enters a ballistic target, it starts to open up. The nose of the ammunition starts to open up, almost mushroom. Think of it as like a parachute on a car. And why that is good is because as it's opening up, it's creating a larger surface space on the face of that projectile. And that allows that bullet to slow down a lot faster. And what you're doing with that is you're mitigating the chance of over-penetration, that round is going to hit, enter, pass through, exit your target, and possibly continue on to hit an innocent, unsuspecting bystander. So in mitigating that, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards and use hollow point ammunition. What hollow point ammunition does not do, it doesn't hit its target and explode. Right? It doesn't also hit its target and just stop right there immediately every time. Right? It is there again to mitigate the chance of over-penetration and exiting that target, but that's not so much guaranteed. Now, full metal jackets, they don't expand, they don't slow down as quickly, and because of that, they could very easily hit, enter, pass through, exit your target if you hit your target, and continue on, and very, very likely to possibly hit somebody else if there's somebody in the background. So here you'll see what a hollow point does after it's passed through a target. Now, Different hollow points perform in different manners, but this particular hollow point, you can see, generally speaking, how a hollow point looks once it's penetrated a ballistic target. It has expanded. You'll notice the nose of the ammunition has expanded. It does make that create that larger surface space that we talked about. And again, that's what you're looking for. That's why you're using that. Now, also, you'll see some that have some hollow points that have a polymer-filled tip. A lot of people tend to use those more or less during the winter so that you can still penetrate through those extra layer of clothing that people may be wearing, but it can still have the use of the hollow point and expand upon penetration of that ballistic target. So you'll notice that sometimes, and that's what that is. So again, we want to go over these firearm safety rules again to make sure that you know and understand what these rules are and how they are important to you and your use of a firearm. The first rule again being treat every firearm as if it were loaded. Right? Again, regardless if you double checked or triple checked, you had somebody else check, you treat that gun as if it is loaded at all times. Never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Again, doesn't say don't point a firearm at another human being. What it does say is do not point a firearm at anybody or anything that you do not intend to shoot. Next rule, keep your firearm on safe until you intend to fire. Now again, not every firearm has safety. Example, Glocks. But if you have a safety in your firearm, great. Use it. Do not rely on it. Next rule, keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you are ready to fire. Right? Where I like to see that finger placement is on the frame of that gun. Right? Does that guarantee that your finger cannot slip onto that frame and on that trigger? It does not guarantee that, but it does better mitigate that versus having it just outside of that trigger guard. And last, and very important when you're talking about concealed carry and self-defense, 3-part rule: know your target, know what you're shooting at, know what lies beyond your target, and also know what lies between you and that target. So now we're going to go over the 3 common pistol action types. First, we're going to start off with double action revolver. Again, double check, make sure it's empty. Now with a double action revolver, we want to remember that the trigger performs 2 actions. Key to the name, double action. When you pull the trigger on a double action revolver, it can both cock and release that hammer. Now with a double action revolver such as this, you can cock the hammer back, and then the trigger is now what? In single action mode. It is when you pull the trigger at this point in time, it's only releasing that hammer. But the trigger is capable of both cocking and releasing that hammer. Now we have single action revolvers. Single action, the trigger can only perform a single action, that single action being releasing the hammer. So what does that tell us? That tells us if we want to fire this gun, we have to first cock the hammer back every single time. So every time we want this gun to fire, we have to pull the hammer back all the way and then pull the trigger. Pull the hammer back all the way and pull the trigger. Now with a semi-automatic, right, magazine's empty, slide chamber is empty. All right. With a semi-automatic, when you pull the trigger on a semi-automatic, it will discharge that firearm one time. And when you pull the trigger on a semi-automatic, it will do a lot of things semi-automatically for you. It will unload that spent casing, it will load the next round for you, and it'll be ready to fire when you release that trigger. So you would pull the trigger one time, it would go off one time, you release that trigger, all right, you release that trigger, and then you pull the trigger again, one more round coming out. Because it is not automatic, it is semi-automatic, all right? Can you buy automatic firearms or fully automatic firearms, machine guns as they're referred to sometimes? Yes, but they're extremely highly regulated and also very, very expensive. In order for anyone in the United States to buy a fully automatic firearm, you have to go through the licensing process that goes through the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And they will do your Class 3 paperwork for you, not for you, they will process your application for you, and then they will get that back to you. That usually takes, depending, I've seen it take as long as 9 to 10 months easily, sometimes longer. So it's not a very easy process to go through, and it's not a very cheap process. The application fee for that alone is $200, and then you have to be able to afford the firearm. So this is a semi-automatic Glock 17. I've looked just for shits and gigs. I've looked for a Glock 18. Glock 18 is a gun just like this, but it has a selector lever so you can shoot full auto. A Glock 18, and just like with anything, the price can fluctuate and whatnot, but generally speaking, the last time I looked for one, I found a dealer that was selling one, and it was $8,300. $8,300 compared to this one that is, everything's like it except for it's not full auto. This is semi-automatic. This costed me $450. So it kind of gives you how expensive it really is and how not that easy for the common person to be able to buy. Now we're going to go more in depth, starting with the double action revolver. So the double action revolver, much like any other firearm, it has a frame. The frame is where all of the other parts connect back to, just like the frame to your vehicle. All right, we have the frame, and then we also have the barrel. Any firearm that shoots a projectile, it has a barrel that guides that downrange. Also, you have the action. The action is a collection of parts that make that firearm operate, much like the drivetrain to your vehicle. Your engine, the transmission, all those different parts that go into making that vehicle actually propel forward or even backward. Now we also have the cylinder. The cylinder on a revolver, that's what holds all your rounds. You'll see each one of these holes inside the chamber, inside the cylinder is referred to as a chamber. When you fire the revolver, all right, every time you pull a trigger, the cylinder of the revolver will revolve. On this particular one, it's counterclockwise. It will revolve and it'll line up the next chamber with the barrel. And when that hammer falls, that chamber's gonna be lined up, that when that round is fired, that projectile travels out of the cylinder, into the barrel, down the barrel, and down towards your target. All right. Now, next, we also have the rear sight, and if we have a rear sight, we have a front sight. We also have our grip panel. We have our trigger guard. Our trigger guard does what? It guards the trigger from any inadvertent pulls. It's a very simple part, but it's very integral. If you weren't to have a trigger guard, and say you were to try to put this firearm back into a holster, it is very likely that that trigger would get caught on your holster and could possibly discharge. So again, the trigger guard is very simple, but very important. So the front end of any barrel of any gun, the front end is referred to as the muzzle end of the gun. Right? Have you ever heard of a muzzle loader? There are firearms that are loaded from the muzzle end. A lot of times rifles, sometimes pistols as well. I have a muzzle loading pistol as well. That is the muzzle end of your gun. Also, you have the rifling inside of the barrel. Inside of the barrel, there are multiple grooves that are cut out. And those cut out and they travel down the barrel in a spiral motion. And what that does is as that projectile is traveling down that barrel towards your intended target, that projectile is going to have that spin, that spiral, and that's going to continue when it exits the barrel of the gun, the muzzle end of that gun. Now, why is that important? That spiral, much like a spiral of a football, it allows that projectile to go much farther and much more accurately. So, and a fun fact is, I've learned recently, is that legally, all handguns, if it's classified as a handgun in America, per ATF regulations, all handguns have rifling. If this pistol were not to have rifling for whatever reason, it would actually be an AOW. That's another class altogether. Now, again, getting back to the parts, we have the hammer and hammer spur. The meaty portion, more or less, is referred to as the hammer. The hammer spur is what I just used to pull that hammer back and lock it back. All right. We also have, on the other side of the firearm, we have the cylinder release latch. On this particular one, it slides forward, and that allows me to, from the other side of the firearm, you may not see it, my thumb is pressing that cylinder out. All right, so I press my cylinder release latch, slide it forward towards the muzzle, and I pop that cylinder out. In this particular firearm, it's out and towards the left. Now, when I go to load or unload this firearm, say it was loaded, I just fired the gun, and I want to unload and reload. When I pop the cylinder out, I lean it back. A lot of times those casings will be still stuck inside that chamber to a certain extent. So what you want to do to assist yourself is you hit that ejector rod, and that'll press those casings out and help you get those casings out rather than taking your fingernails and trying to dig them out yourself. All right? And again, getting back to it, we had the trigger guard. We also have the trigger. What does the trigger do? When you pull that trigger, this gun goes off. That trigger both cocks and releases the hammer on this double action revolver. Now getting into these single action revolvers. Single action revolver, much like the one here, single action revolver, you don't pop the entire cylinder out. This is going to be very similar overall to a double action revolver, but obviously there's going to be some differences. So instead of hitting a cylinder release latch and being able to pop the entire cylinder out to either unload or to reload or to initially load that revolver, what you have to do, first know that there is, when you pull the hammer back, there are 3 distinct clicks. All right, 1, 2, 3. 3 is where you fire from. 2 is where you can load from. When you get to 2, that allows this cylinder to free float, so you can rotate it freely. Once you've half cocked it, you've gotten to the second click on this single action, you then open your loading gate, and that allows you access to one chamber at a time. You'll see I can eject, I can hit this ejector rod. The ejector rod on this only ejects one casing at a time. So I would eject, load, and rotate. Eject, load, rotate. Eject, load, rotate, so on and so forth. This particular single action holds 7 rounds total. Right? Again, once you've loaded up and you're ready to fire, when you're ready to fire each and every single shot, you must cock the hammer back every single time and then pull the trigger. Cock it back every single time, all the way back, and then fire. All right? And again, when it's time to unload and reload, again, half cock. 1, 2, open the loading gate, eject, load, rotate. Eject, load, rotate, so on and so forth. You might see why this is not that popular of a firearm nowadays. This used to be at one point in time in history the cream of the crop. But with advancing technology, a lot of people now went to double action revolvers, and now even more popular, semi-automatics. So now we're going to go into the semi-automatics, and we're going to start actually with the SIG P220. Now this here one I'm using right here, this is actually chambered in 45 ACP versus the one on the slide is actually in 40. So we're going to start with, much like on our double actions and single action revolvers, it has a frame. All the parts connect back to the frame. Also built into the frame is our trigger guard. We also have the trigger, and on the other side we have our magazine release. Magazine release, what do you think the magazine release does based on the name? It releases the magazine. So with that, I hit that magazine release button right there. I'm hitting it with my left pinky finger, or my left pointer finger, and the magazine comes on out. Now also we have our slide. When we pull back the slide with the empty magazine inserted, whenever you fire a semi-automatic that is, and the magazine goes empty, most of them are built so that the slide locks to the rear. What that's doing is that magazine is pressing on that slide release, that slide catch. Right? Now if I want to get that slide to go back forward, I can either pull back and let go, or I can pull the slide back and engage that slide release, slide catch by pressing up with my thumb. And that'll get caught into the bottom of the slide, holding that slide to the rear. Now, whenever we fire a round or we've cocked the hammer back manually, the hammer will stay back until decocked. How that looks is right here. This is a decocking lever. When you bring this down, it will safely decock that firearm without possibly firing. It is a better alternative, safer alternative to, instead of putting your finger here, trying to release the trigger and let it guide forward. A safer option, an easier option, is to use that decocking lever, which again will look like this. All right. Now also, to take apart this firearm, there'll be a takedown lever, but we'll go to that better later. We're talking about disassembly and reassembly of a firearm. So we talked about the safety rules for gun handling. We've also talked about different types of handguns and their parts. But now we're actually going to go to how you effectively use that handgun to engage a target. Now getting into stance, all right, we want to focus real quick on our foot placement. Now with that, we don't want to have our feet too close together, right? That is going to make us unstable. But at the same note, we don't want to be overextended. We don't want to have too much room between our feet. All right? Instead, we want to have our feet, much like in sports, shoulder width apart. Now when it comes to our overall stance, we don't want to have our knees locked out. Right? We also don't want to have our knees too far bent. We don't want to be crouching. Right? Instead, we want to be standing firmly, but with a slight bend in our knees. Now, when we go into shooting or we're drawing our firearm, it would help to bring that strong foot back for your stability and also be able to put some weight behind that firearm. All right, so when you're drawing your firearm and you decide you want to shoot, oftentimes for some reason people will bring the gun up to a certain level and then they decide they were going to adjust their entire body to line up to that gun. Right? That is not, what you want to do. Instead, when you bring the gun out, bring the gun to your line of sight. Right? You don't have to adjust your whole body. Bring the gun, adjust the gun to you, not you to the gun. So now we're going to go into sight alignment. All right. So what we see here is traditional sights. We got a front sight in the center and a rear sight around the outside. What you want to do is you want to have equal height and equal light. The front sight post, you'll notice how when it's lined up in the center of that rear sight notch, that it's not filling that entire void. there's a little bit of space on both sides, and that's natural. You're going to have that. It won't ever fill it completely. But with that light, you want to make sure that light is equal on both sides. If your gun's not perfectly lined up, you'll have more light on one side versus the other. So you want to make sure you have what's called equal light on both sides. Now also with the top of the front sight post and the rear sight notch, you want to have the top of those lined up evenly. So we call that equal height and equal light, right? That is your sight alignment. And now that's going to be, your sights might look different depending on what sights you have on your gun. You might have a little bit of like a front sight that's fiber optic. You might have a white dot in the front and a U shape in the rear. You might have 3 dots, 2 in the rear and 1 in the front. All that doesn't matter because what remains the same on all pistol sights is your rear sight notch and your front sight post, equal height, and that equal light. So now we have established our sight alignment. Now we want to look at our sight picture. So with our sight picture, we're looking at 3 things here. In the background, we see our target. We also see in the center here, we see our front sight post, but also we see our rear sight notch. Now with looking at these 3 elements, your eye can only focus on one thing at a time, right? So of those 3 things, target, front sight post, and rear sight notch, you want to make sure your eye is focused on that front sight post. Notice how the target is blurry in the background, but we can still tell. With our sights lined up as they are, if we were to pull the trigger at this point in time, where is that round going to hit? It's going to hit center, right? So you want to have your front sight post focused. If there was a speck of dust on there, if there was a word written on there, you should be able to see it because your eye is focused on it. If your eye is not focused on it, you'll never notice that word was there, that letter was there, that piece of dust was there. So again, you want to be able to focus on that front sight post. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to do a ocular dominance test. Many people know which hand they are dominant with, whether it's the right hand or left hand. Not that many people know which is their dominant eye or even realize that there is a dominant eye. So what we're going to do, find either a target reference in the room or even this red dot on the screen now. Now looking at that red dot on the screen, you want to bring your hands out in front of your face. You want to make a small diamond, right? And you're going to look through that diamond. Make a small one. Don't make a big one. Make a small one. Find that target reference. All right, mine's going to be the camera lens, and I'm going to look at it with both eyes open through that aperture in my hands. Now I'm going to bring the aperture, keep both eyes open, and keep that camera lens centered. I'm going to bring it back to my face. And what that did is that brought it back to my right eye. I am right-handed, and I just established that I am right eye dominant. All right. Some of y'all might have figured out that, hey, you might be left-handed, but you're right eye dominant, or vice versa. You're right-handed, but you're left eye dominant. That's not that much of a difficult thing to adapt to, especially when you talk about handguns. Rifles and shotguns a little bit different, but for handguns today, a little bit more simplified. Right. So here am I using my right eye and using my right hand. All right, have them lined up. And then what I'm going to do is all I'm doing is I'm lining up the sights now. Instead of my right eye, I'm lining up my left. You may not even notice it, but I offset the gun a little bit. So instead of lining up my right eye, it's with my left eye. All right, now I'm using my left eye. That's not that big of a deal. It's not that difficult to deal with. Again, long guns, totally different story. But with handguns, you want to shoot with your dominant hand and your dominant eye. And you can do that both at the same time with no issue. So now let's move into trigger control. All right, with trigger control, a lot of people ask me, where on the trigger do I put my finger? Or how much finger do I put on the trigger? Do I use just the tip of my finger? Or do I put a lot of finger on there? It all depends. All right. What does it depend on? 1, it depends on the size of your hands. And 2, it also depends on the gun that you're using. So with my Glock 17, I know that what I need to do is, with my Glock 17, with my hands, I put the trigger about centered on the first palm of my trigger finger. What that looks like is I'm going to use a knife to show you. So using the back of this blade, this being my trigger, right? The trigger ends up making contact with my finger about there on my trigger finger. All right, it's not all the way towards the tip of my finger. It's not closer to that inside of the knuckle. All right, it's kind of more towards the center. But that's what works for me in my hand. Now note, whether you maybe notice it or not, I have relatively large hands. So if you have smaller hands using the same Glock 17, your finger placement on that trigger might be closer to the tip of your finger. Or if you have larger hands than I, your finger might end up being closer to the knuckle of that finger. So It's not the same for everybody. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You're going to have to figure that out once you get a good, firm purchase with that firearm in your hand, all right? Once you have established that, all right, you want to make sure that when you are pulling that trigger to the rear, that you're doing so smoothly and consistently without disturbing your sights. You don't want to get a good finger placement, get your good sight alignment and sight picture, and then you pull the trigger so damn fast that the sights end up, like the gun ends up being off target, or you end up anticipating the shot. You want to have a slow, deliberate, not so much slow, a smooth and consistent pull to the rear without disturbing those sights. Now, obviously, with practice, you'll be able to do that faster. But you want to definitely start slow, and if you can establish accuracy, you can do it the right way, the safe way, obviously, the right way, the safe way, and you can establish a good, consistent shot group, then you might want to speed it up a little bit, challenge yourself while trying to maintain accuracy. But the main thing is that if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast. So you want to make sure that you do it smoothly and consistently, and with time, with practice, the speed will come. So once you pull the trigger on your semi-automatic, you are going to want to let go of that trigger smoothly and consistently until you feel and hear that click. All right, I felt it, you heard it, you may have even seen a little bit of that jolt in my finger, but that is where the trigger has now reset. I no longer have to let that trigger go any farther out. If I do, it will go farther out, but I just want to let go of the trigger until I hear that click, and then I'm going to, when I'm ready, I can go ahead and press that trigger again, and with less trigger pull, it'll be able to go off, all right? And again, when I let go of that trigger, I'm going to slowly let go until I hear and feel, all right, that click. All right, I'm gonna do it one time for you again. Hear and feel that click. All right, once I get my sight alignment, sight picture lined up, and I decide I need to fire again, pull that trigger just slightly to the rear, and it'll go off. All right, so we call that press the trigger, reset the trigger, press. Press, reset, press. All right. So before we get started on loading and reload, I want to go ahead and show you all. Today what we're using just straight dummy rounds. These are 9mm dummy rounds. You can buy them on Amazon or at your local gun shop. They're usually about 80 cents to $1 a pop, depending on how many you buy at a time. But our magazines are loaded dummy rounds, and our gun is clear. Now, what we're going to get into is our initial load, our tactical reload, and our dry reload. All right, so initially, way I do things is that I always have the slide locked to the rear. If my slide is locked to the rear, the magazine is out, and that indicates to you that my gun is empty. But again, you always want to double check. You never want to assume. You want to treat every gun as if it were loaded. So double check, no magazine inserted, no round in the chamber, all right? And again, my first magazine, my initial magazine's loaded with a few dummies. All right, so we have our slide locked to the rear. We took it out of the case, we're at the range and whatnot, and we have our slide to the rear, double check to make sure it's empty before we start our initial load. With our initial load, you want to index the magazine. Where your index finger is along the front of the magazine, this is the back. On different magazines are set up different ways. On the Glocks, on the back, they have round indicators, starting with 4 all the way down to 17. It'll show you how many rounds you have left in that magazine, or how many you've loaded in that magazine. All right, so the front is an opposite of that. It's a little bit more rounded along the front of that. We want to have our finger along the front of that magazine. Index finger is matched up nearly with the tip of that first round. Right? And what that's called is indexing the magazine. Now, having our firing point in a safe direction, we're going to go ahead and take that magazine, and we're going to, it's going to match up, and I can feel it in place. That's why we're indexing, so I don't have to look to see exactly what I'm doing. I don't want to have to do that. If I need to, I can, but I don't want to have to do this. So I always want to practice indexing the magazine. Once I have that magazine indexed and I have it started, I can go ahead and insert, and I always tap again to make sure it's all the way in. Grab it along the back, pull back, rack, this is called racking, and let go, right? You don't want to, you want to take and pull it back and then guide it forward. You're more likely to actually jam the gun doing it that way. It is built to do it without your help. So go ahead and tap, pull back, and let go. If you were to baby it forward, it's more likely to jam, and I'll show you what that might look like. All right, so you're going to pull back, and we're going to guide it forward. All right, and it loaded all the way that time. But that's not what you want to do. You don't want to have the slide come back babied forward. Just pull that slide back, all right, and if you have another round in it, it'll go forward. Now, you notice the slide locked to the rear when I did that. Why did it do that? when you pull the trigger on a semi-automatic and there's no more rounds in the magazine, all right, that slide will go ahead and lock back. That magazine will hit the slide release from the inside. It'll push it up into a notch that's cut out on the bottom of the slide, and that'll make sure that the slide retains back to the rear. Now, does that work 100% of the time? No. For different reasons, your gun may not do that. Your magazine might be malfunctioning and whatnot. But this is what that indicates. When the slide locks to the rear, that tells you that the gun is probably empty. In that case, I always double check. I always bring it back in, right? I want to make sure that it actually is unloaded. It's not just jammed, right? And I'm going to drop that magazine, right? And then I'm going to go into, this is what's called our dry reload. My gun has ran dry. My magazine is empty. If your gas tank is empty, it is what? Dry. So we are on a dry reload. So we drop that magazine right on the ground because it's worthless. Now we're going to go ahead and, again, index that next magazine, insert, tap, rack, and then we can get back into it. Now, if you are in an incident or you're on the range shooting and you haven't run dry yet, if I've shot a couple rounds on this gun, looking at the gun right now, what can I safely assume by looking at it right now? I can safely assume that there's at least one round in the chamber. All right? I might be wrong on that too, but I can safely and reasonably assume there's at least one round in the chamber. There might be no rounds in the magazine. There might be 2, there might be 5, there might be 10, there might be 16 in the magazine. But we just got done with whatever we're doing, the drill we just did, or we got done eliminating a threat. At this point in time, if we have a lull in the fight, let's say that the person has been eliminated from the fight and there might be secondary or third threats, and/or they ducked around the building to reload or whatever they got to do, you have what's called a lull in the fight. If you have the opportunity, you want to go ahead and do what's called a tactical reload. You don't have to reload this gun. It's not dry. It's still loaded. But when and if that threat represents itself, you want to make sure that you're best prepared to be able to engage that. All right, so what we have first is our initial load. All right, so our gun's empty. Double check, no magazine inserted, new round in chamber. All right, now we're going to initially load our gun, whether it's on the range or at home because we're about to conceal carry for the day, whatever it might be. You have our initial load. So we're going to take our magazine, load dummy rounds, and we're going to go ahead and index that magazine. Index finger along the front of the magazine. All right, this is the back, that's the front. Index finger along the front of the magazine, and with that we're going to be able to load. Why do we use our index finger? Because we don't have to look the magazine into the frame of the gun. We can actually feel our way in there. Once it's in there, it's at least started, we can go ahead and finish inserting. I always double check and I tap, pull back and let go, rack, and now it's ready to fire. You can go ahead and fire if you needed to, or holster. All right. Now, when you run dry, when you fire and the slide locks to the rear, why does it do that? That's telling you that the gun is empty. So what we do is we drop that magazine. All right. We drop it around the ground because it's worthless now. Take out your next magazine. As you're doing that, index, insert, tap, and right there what you saw is my gun has been used many, many times. It's really broken in. So I actually particularly like what we just saw there. So what we just saw was when I tapped the magazine, that actually disengaged the slide catch. That actually jumped out of it, and the slide went forward because of that. And I kind of like that particularly myself, but know that when that happens, that your gun is now loaded. You can double check if you needed to, make sure that round is actually in that gun, but it is now loaded, ready to go. You wouldn't have to actually erect the slide. So what I would, though, have to do is, again, if it didn't happen that way, right, I would insert, tap, rack, and now I can go ahead and restart my use of that drill. Now, when you're firing, right, whether on the range or self-defense, what I can look at and assume right now, while I might be wrong, I can safely and reasonably assume that looking at the gun I've been firing, I have at least one round in the chamber still, right, because the slide didn't lock back, right, and I don't know exactly how many rounds left in my gun. It might be, in my magazine itself, there might be 2, there might be 5, 10, there might be 16 rounds left, but I can safely assume that there's at least one round left in that chamber. So if we have a lull in the fight, what we want to do is we can go ahead and take that magazine, we take our next magazine out. I mean, this is a 17 round magazine ready to go. I can go ahead and grab a hold of the bottom of that magazine, rotate this next magazine in, tap to make sure it's all the way in there, I don't have to mess with the slide. Why? Because again, that one round is in there. So now, before I had an unknown amount of rounds in my magazine, and I had one round in the chamber. Now I have 17 in the magazine, one in the chamber, and I'm ready to go if and when that threat were to represent itself. And because that other magazine still had a few rounds left, I'm going to take that, and like I did, I went ahead and put it back into my magazine pouch. All right, so again, to summarize, we have our initial load. When the gun is completely empty, right? Verify, make sure the round there's no round in the chamber and there's no magazine inserted. So this is a completely empty gun. We have our initial load where we initially load it. We also have our tactical reload, right? Drop the magazine, rotate, insert, and stow, right? And then when you're shooting and you run dry, what happens? The slide locks to the rear, all right? So slide to the rear, gun's empty, drop the magazine around the ground, take out your next magazine, index, insert, tap, rack, and bang. That is our dry reload. Tactical, dry, and initial. All right, so what you see here, we see interruptions of cycle operations. What is that? That's a long way of saying that your gun is jammed, all right? Your gun is jammed. Why did that happen? All right, so it could be multiple things, all right? So when you pull the trigger, nothing happens. Why did that happen? Well, it could be the fact that the round was in the chamber, but it was a bad round. The primer didn't go off, whatever it might be. It could be that, or it could be there's no round in the chamber. So let's start with there's a round in the chamber. Pull the trigger, nothing happens. What do? Tap, rack, bang, try again. All right, what we did is we got that bad round out of there and loaded the next round of the magazine into that chamber, and we can go ahead and fire that again, all right? Now, again, let's say something happens and you pull the trigger again, nothing happens. What do you do again? Well, initially we did our immediate action. Now we're going to do our remedial action. So now we want to take that magazine out. Something might be wrong with that. Get that round of the chamber, all right? And we want to go and restart, all right? Insert, tap, rack, and bang, all right? Another fact, it could be that when you're shooting, you actually hit that magazine release a little bit prematurely. You didn't really notice it. The magazine's not fully inserted. So if that happens when you fire and it gets that one round out, it didn't put another round into that chamber because it wasn't there. So we notice how there's no round in chamber now. So again, with that, what you do is when you pull the trigger, nothing happens. Again, same thing. All right, tap the magazine, rack the slide, bang, try again. Why are we tapping the magazine? Because of just that, to make sure that the magazine is fully inserted. It may at times look like it's fully inserted, but it's not. So you always tap and then rack, and then again, why did this happen? Why? Because the magazine is empty. So no round in the magazine, no round in the chamber, we'd have to do a what? Dry reload, all right? So that is our initial load, and that is our immediate action and our remedial action. And that is to deal with a jam or an interruption in the cycle operations for our semi-automatic handgun. So what we see here is how I have it set up right here is where it failed to extract the round, the casing, out of the chamber, and now trying to load the next one in there. And you can't put two rounds in the same chamber. So in order to get this fixed, what we need to do is go ahead and lock this slide to the rear, drop this magazine, get that casing out of there. It fell out, but I'm gonna make sure that it's fully out of there. We're have to slide a few times. Go ahead and, again, start your initial load of insert, tap, rack, and then bang. Now with the next picture you see there, it extracted the casing, but it didn't eject it properly. So what we see here, again, how you can kind of fix this is a little bit easier, where you can actually pull the slide back to relieve the pressure on that casing. Go ahead and release that slide to the rear, get that casing out of there, dump it to the side, and then release the slide forward, right? And now we just fixed that jam as well, right? Now just like your vehicle, your guns are prone to, at times, have mechanical failures. Parts can wear out. How do you maintain your gun? Simply cleaning your firearm can really avoid a lot of that. Guns are not as difficult or as needy per se as our vehicles. What do we have to do with our vehicles periodically? We got to change the oil, we got to rotate the tires, we have to check on the belts, different things like that, top off the fluids. Right? With a firearm, it's a lot more simplified. Generally speaking, a good cleaning every time you use it, or at least once a year, is what you're going to be wanting to do. All right, so whether you take the gun to the range every month, whether you do a training opportunity once a year, whatnot, you want to make sure you clean this gun every time you use it. And even if you don't, say you're just carrying it and whatnot, you'll notice with carrying your firearm, whether you carry appendix carrier or inside the waistband, you'll notice that it'll collect sweat during the summer months. You'll get dirt and lint and whatnot. So even if you've been carrying for the past year and you haven't shot your gun at all, it's still a great idea to make sure you give it a good cleaning. When you're cleaning your gun, it doesn't take a whole lot. We'll go over that here in a second about cleaning your gun. Another aspect is that I get a lot of questions about is my magazines. Should I leave my magazines loaded or should I keep them unloaded? Well, if you're having them for home defense, you have your gun for home defense or concealed carry, you're obviously going to keep them loaded. What wouldn't be a bad idea, let's say you have a Glock, let's just say you have a Glock 17 and you have the magazine that is inside the gun, and I like to carry 2 extra magazines on my person. What wouldn't be a bad idea is to have 6 magazines total, so that you're using 3 magazines at any one time, and then every 3 or 4 months. It wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and unload these magazines and then reload those rounds into, if those rounds are still serviceable, reload them into your other 3 magazines. Much like rotating the tires of your car so that they're not overly worn and they don't just sit there. Because when you load this magazine fully, say you have 17 rounds in this magazine, this will be almost entirely full, and that spring will be really decompressed inside the bottom of that magazine. And if it sits like that for a very long time, it could create problems. It could induce jams on your gun. But again, with that, from my experience, and this is a matter of opinion for some people, but based on my experience, that's not a huge problem if the magazines were to stay loaded for 6 months to a year at a time. That wouldn't be the end of the world. Where you maybe start seeing problems more often is if you have that magazine loaded for more than a year or 2 or 3 years at a time, because you just haven't been firing it. So you want to make sure that obviously if you have your gun for home defense or self-defense, concealed carry, that you have magazines loaded. But at times it wouldn't be a bad idea to cycle them out with other magazines. And also with any of your magazines, whether you use just the same 3 all the time or you swap them out, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take them apart, clean them, and put them back together. Because just like anything, just like your gun, just like anything else, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and make sure that this remains serviceable and change out any parts that may need to be swapped. Now with cleaning your guns, it's just like anything. If you wanted to, would it be a bad idea? Do you, might you want to wear gloves while cleaning your guns, wear some eye protection, whatnot? That wouldn't be a bad idea, but it's not so much necessary. Basic common sense does need to apply though. You're not going to want to get any of this stuff, any of these solvents, any of the dirt and stuff in your eyes. You obviously want to put it in your mouth, and afterwards you definitely want to clean your hands afterwards, because you get some of these lead particulates on your hands while you're cleaning these guns, and that's not the greatest thing for your health. So if nothing else, if you don't use PPE when you're cleaning your guns, which you don't so much have to, again, just make sure that you don't get it in your eyes or your mouth, and that you clean these hands. So let's get into actually disassembly, reassembly, and cleaning of a firearm. Particularly today, we're going to be working with the Glock 17, and this is a 5th generation. So the first step of cleaning any firearm is to make sure that you unload the firearm. The first step of unloading any firearm is to take out the source of the ammunition. In this case, obviously the magazine. So we're going to drop the magazine out first, all right? And then we are going to take the round out of the chamber, if there is a round, and it did come out, all right? Why you want to do it in that order is because if you take out the round out of the chamber first, and then you take out the magazine, what do you still have? You still have a loaded firearm. Because if you were to pull the trigger, which is required as part of the disassembly process, you would fire off a round, because there's still a round in the chamber. That's why you always take the source of the ammunition out first, drop that magazine, and then you clear the barrel. And then from there, you want to physically and visually inspect that the chamber is clear, the magazine well is clear, and now we are able to do our cleaning once we get this ammunition and the magazine out of our workspace. So now that we have the ammunition out of our workspace, right, we want to make sure that, again, double check, make sure it's clear, and then we're going to send the slide home. All right, we can do that by pulling the slide back and let it go forward. From here, we have to pull the trigger. Right? Again, another example of why it's extremely important to make sure you clear your firearm out first. All right, so now we have these slide forward. We have the trigger has been pulled. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this next part. It's 2 different ways to do the same exact thing, just showing you different ways, because not everyone's able to do one or the other way. So we're going to take and we're going to put our nose of our firearm into the table, all right, and we're going to press the grip forward, the frame forward. That's going to bring back this slide just a little bit, right? Now, once we have that, we're going to grab the takedown lever. It is visible and accessible from both sides, and you need to, from both sides, you need to grab that and pull it towards the base of the firearm. All right, so that's going to be from my left to my right. So I'm going to use my middle finger on one side, my thumb on the other in order to do that. I'm going to pull down, and when I have that pulled down, I'm going to lift up on the frame, and the slide will then come off. So now I have the frame, I have the slide assembly, which includes right now at this point, we still have the spring and spring guide, which we're going to depress and take out. We're also going to take out the barrel, right? Lift up from the chamber end, right? And then we have our slide. This is now what we refer to as a field stripped Glock. From here, we can then move into the actual cleaning portion. So the first step that I use when cleaning my firearms is, once I got my firearms breaking apart, I'm gonna put them to the side a little bit, and I don't wanna mess up my tablecloth, so I'm gonna lay out this old shop towel, whatnot. You can use old shirt, whatever it might be, because I'm going to spray down all these parts as much as possible, all right? Spray them inside and out, and I'm not particular myself, but today I'm using ram oil. It's decent for cleaning your firearms, also lubricates and also protects your the surface of your firearms. I'm gonna go ahead and use this. I'm gonna spray down inside and out all over any of these parts of my firearm, all right? And you don't have to be worried about, you know, using too much. There's no such thing as too much, all right? Inside and out. This stuff gives you ideas about $5-6 a can. And I use it regularly, and it takes me a while to get through the entire can anyway. So definitely get it all in there, inside and out. All right. And then if I had time, obviously I'd let it sit for a little while, but I'm not going to do that today. But you know, just let it sit on there for about 5-10 minutes at the most. Let it really break down that dirt and any gunk that's on there. But after that, what I'm actually going to do is take a brush. You can use an old toothbrush. These are nice little fancy brushes made for cleaning guns, but honestly, it's not quite necessary. A simple toothbrush from Walmart will work. I got like a 5-pack of these from Walmart for like $5. But I'm going to go and take this. I'm going to hit anything that it can reach inside and out of this gun, right? And it is, you know, again, it's not going to be exactly perfect. How clean you make your gun is really up to you. You know, you could detail it inside and out every time you shoot it. You could, you know, let it sit for a year and not even touch it. It's all up to you on how clean you make your gun. It's all personal preference. The general rule of thumb is, you know, every time you take it to the range, and if you don't take the range all the time, at least once a year or so. And with that, again, it'll be able to make sure the firearm is working properly and efficiently when you need it, right? When that might be. All right. So I'm gonna hit this thing inside and out. Get inside that mag well with this thing, on the grip, everything inside that trigger. All right. All right. And after that, I'm gonna take and I'm going to wipe down this excess cleaner and solvent. All right, get it all off there as much as possible. All right, and what we just did when it came to spraying the gun down and wiping it down, or brushing it down, you could do that multiple times if you wanted to. One time in general works for me, but again, whatever works best for you and what you find suitable for your firearm, that's your prerogative. All right, so I'm gonna get as much as I can off of there. All right, gonna go ahead and do that also with the slide. All right. All right, and again, you're not gonna be able to get all of it just with a simple, you know, shop towel or shirt. But by the way, I'm using a shop towel or not, but a shirt honestly works perfectly great. Use an old T-shirt, and they can actually get into a little smaller spots because they're a lot thinner. Shop towels honestly aren't as good as T-shirts, in my opinion. All right. Go ahead and get the barrel cleaned off. Get the spring guide. All right. Now, while I have it taken apart, which you can do this taken apart or put together, I'm going to get my bore snake out. All right, and this bore snake, you can actually use it on firearms that are chambered in 9mm, 380, 38 Special, 357 Magnum, amongst a few other ones. But with this, with the gun taken apart or put together, I can run this through my barrel and clean the inside of my barrel out. Right, and you definitely want to, generally speaking, especially if it's put together, you want to take it and you want to put it in through the chamber end and pull it through to the muzzle end. But one time, right, we'll actually make it pretty damn clean. You can do it twice, it's not gonna hurt anything, right? If you do it more than twice though, you're just playing with it. All right, so pull that through. All right, and what I'm gonna do is actually, now I'm gonna come back behind with Q-tips. These are nothing special. These are any type of Q-tips you can get from Walmart or any type of store. And with this, I can get into all these hard to reach spots. And two things it does for me. One, I can grab onto any leftover solvent or cleaner. And two, it kind of gives me a gauge of how clean really is my gun. If you go over this entire gun with one Q-tip and the Q-tip's still white as day, then your gun's pretty damn clean. Get inside this trigger guard, behind the trigger, right, inside this magazine well, down through the top, right, getting all these spots. Pretty much if it's glistening, it's probably got solvent still left on it, so you want to get all of that out of there, right? Because if for nothing else, this is my carry gun. So when I go to put this back on later, I'm wearing a decent shirt, so I don't want that solvent and stuff to be coming out of my firearm all over my holster and my clothes, right? So I want to get as much of that off as possible. I'm going to run this, pull that through there. All right. Again, I'll rub down the outside. I see some more solvent coming out of these little hard to reach spots. All right. So now I've got it generally pretty decently clean, but I'm not totally finished yet. All right. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to reassemble the gun now, right? So I'm going to grab from the chamber end, I'm going to drop the muzzle in first, and then put the entire barrel into that slide, all right? Once I do that, I'm going to take the spring guide, again, starting from the muzzle end, put in, seat it, and then I'm going to depress that spring just a little bit so that it gets into the bottom of that locking lug of that barrel. Now I can turn it right side up again. I'm going to go ahead and these channels are going to go right onto the back of that slide. Right, and I'm gonna match it up, and I want to make sure I keep it matched up as I'm pulling the slide slowly and consistently to the rear. All right, and from there, the gun is back put together. You want to make sure, especially with these Gen 5s, they can be kind of finicky when you're pulling the slide back. If you don't keep it perfectly lined up, it can actually come off the rails. So you want to make sure you keep it lined up. All right, and I'm going to now make sure, again, just double check. I'm always double checking, triple checking, make sure my gun's unloaded when I'm handling it. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the solvent's not coming out anywhere. I like to work the slide a little bit. That'll help bring some of those solvents and cleaners out to the surface. All right. All right, and then after this, I'm still going to take some more Q-tips and run it all over this firearm. All right, again, inside that trigger guard, right behind the trigger. It's a nice spot for dirt to hide and the solvent to come out at. All right, I'm going to lock the slide back and get up underneath the slide there. A lot of solvent ended up there now. All right, and again, it's not exactly perfect. All right, I'm definitely going to probably spend a little bit more time later getting some more solvent off the trigger and behind the trigger guard, inside that magazine well. I can still from here, I can get Q-tips inside that upper portion of the slide while the slide's to the rear, right, the ejection port. And again, this has now been disassembled, reassembled, and then also cleaned as well. That is the disassembly, reassembly of this Glock 17. I want to go ahead and show you, while I have the moment, I want to go ahead and show you the second way of actually taking the Glock 17 apart. So before I pull the trigger and put the nose into the table, right, a different way to do that, and not everyone's able to do either way, so that's why I show both ways. Some people, retain better on one way or the other. But I'm going to go ahead and grab onto the top of the slide. I'm going to use my thumb to press down on the frame a little bit, and again, accomplishing the same thing as when I put the nose on the table. I'm just bringing that slide back just a little bit. All right. Now again, while that slides to the rear, I'm gonna grab from one side, my thumb on the slide lock. I'm gonna take my thumb on one side, my middle finger on the other, and just pull it right on off. All right. Again, matching it back up to put it right back on. I'm gonna match it up, keep it matched up, pull it all the way to the rear. All right, and let go. All right, disassembly, reassembly of a Glock 17, particularly the Gen 5, and make sure that you take a moment. This is not going to be one of those things where I remember the first time when I took apart my Glock 17, the very first time, I actually was taking it from looking at it on the book to the Glock comes with, and trying to take those words and read them on the paper and turn them into action. And I wasn't able to do that without frustration. And so while I make it look somewhat easy, it is going to be a little bit difficult your first time. And what I would generally tell people to do is get it, do it, and make sure you know how to disassembly, reassemble that firearm. But go ahead, once you've got it down at least once, do it 2-3 more times, because with more repetition, it becomes easier and easier, and you'll better remember it for next time. But you can always come back to this video later and examine how to actually take apart your Glock 17 for future references. So that is your disassembly and reassembly of your Glock 17. All right, for other videos of how to take apart different various firearms, be sure to go to our YouTube channel at PTPGun.com, Firearms Training on YouTube, and we'll be able to show you other videos of various handguns out there and how they disassemble, because not every firearm is just like the Glock 17. Some of them are similar, but many have different variations of that. So oftentimes when people go to buy their first firearm, they might ask me for my opinion. They might ask me, Ryan, what do you think I should buy? What do you think I should buy? What do you think a good firearm is for a first-time buyer? What about this? So what I want to figure out is not what works for me that I can tell you to go buy, but instead what works for you. Right? So first thing I'm going to ask you is, what are you going to be actually using this firearm for? Is it for home defense? Is it for hunting? Is it for shooting competitively? Is it for concealed carry? Because different uses of a firearm call for different types of firearms. Right? I wouldn't try to use a Mini Cooper to run a big rig trucking company. So different needs call for different firearms. So what I would say is, hey, are you going to use it for home defense or concealed carry? Home defense, you're not so much worried about the overall size or profile. You're not so much carrying it on your person. But if you're concealed carrying, I train a lot of realtors. They might be wanting to conceal carry, but they want to be discreet because they don't want to offend a client. So with that, they might want to get something that's a little bit more smaller overall profile, has a little less weight to it. If you're going to be hunting, obviously that's going to be a whole totally different spectrum of things. Competitive shooting, if you're shooting competitively and you're wanting to buy a firearm for that, you're going to be looking to spend a lot of money. It's going to be an ugly ass gun most of the time, and it's going to be heavy as hell. So just know that going into that. These are the things you got to think about when you're talking about buying a firearm. Another thing you're going to go into is, are you able to operate that firearm? Can you pull the slide back on that semi-automatic? Can you pull the trigger on that double action only pistol? Are you able to hit that magazine release and get it to actually operate? Because I've trained people from all different backgrounds and lifestyles. I've trained people that I've trained amputees. I've trained people that are a little bit more mature in age and they don't have possibly the same hand strength that they once had. So they might have to adapt to those new changes in their life and their health. So you have to think about that, because if you buy this great firearm and whatnot, but you can't actually drop the magazine, you can't pull the slide back in order to put that round in the chamber, are you actually going to be using that firearm? Is it going to be useful to you? Now, next thing, and this is going to be a big part, but it shouldn't be the main thing or the only thing you look at, but price. All right, prices of firearms vary. The cheapest handgun I've ever bought was $125. The most expensive handgun that I've ever bought was about $2,700. One, that's not the most expensive gun out there. Two, the cheapest gun I bought, that's not the cheapest gun out there. So know that firearms prices can vary. That $2,700 gun is nice and whatnot, but it doesn't, I don't have too many uses for it. I can't use it for everything I need it for. So, and you may not have the money to buy a $2,700 gun. So you got to find what works for you, your lifestyle, and your wallet. What I would generally say is a good practice of buying a firearm is to, find about 5 handguns that you think you generally like, that feel good in your hand, that generally look good aesthetically, because let's be serious, that's going to play a part too for a lot of people is, does it look good? But find the guns that you think you generally like, find about 5 of them, all right? Don't even look at the price yet. Find 5 of them, get those, and then use them, all right? Find buddies that own them and go out to the range and shoot with them and borrow them. Go to a range that rents them and rent them and use them, and find out which one you actually like to fire. Find which one you actually are more accurate with. Find out what actually works for you. Once you've done that, try to narrow that 5 or so down to about 2 to 3. And from there, then I would start looking at price and calculating that in as well. Another thing you're going to want to look at is also the aftermarket, because some firearms have a larger aftermarket than others. And if you're going to be carrying that particular firearm, it may say certain brands or types of firearms from a certain brand may not have a lot of holster options. So if you can't find a proper holster to work with that firearm for how you need to concealed carry with your life, that might not be the right firearm for you. So you want to calculate that in too. Can you find magazines for it? Can you find holsters for it? Can you find all that affordably? So you definitely want to calculate that in as well when it comes to purchasing your handgun. What works for me may not work for you. Do I carry a Glock 17? Yes, but that's not to say that it's the best gun nor the right gun for you. So you find out what works for you, get the best gun for you. So again, we want to go over these firearm safety rules again to make sure that you know and understand what these rules are and how they are important to you and your use of a firearm. The first rule again being, treat every firearm as if it were loaded. Right? Again, regardless if you double checked or triple checked, you had somebody else check, you treat that gun as if it is loaded at all times. Never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Again, doesn't say don't point a firearm at another human being. What it does say is do not point a firearm at anybody or anything that you do not intend to shoot. Next rule, keep your firearm on safe until you intend to fire. Now again, not every firearm has a safety. Example, Glocks. But if you have a safety in your firearm, great. Use it. Do not rely on it. Next rule, keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you are ready to fire. Right? Where I like to see that finger placement is on the frame of that gun. Right? Does that guarantee that your finger cannot slip onto that frame and on that trigger? It does not guarantee that, but it does better mitigate that versus having it just outside of that trigger guard. And last, and very important when you're talking about concealed carry and self-defense, 3-part rule: know your target, know what you're shooting at, know what lies beyond your target, and also know what lies between you and that target. So thank you all again for joining us for this presentation. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at PTPGun. Also, you can find us on YouTube at PTPGun.com, Firearms Training.